Today, let's take a quick look at the world in 1750. This video is a compilation of all the YouTube shorts that I've done on this particular unit. So how did France go from civil war and chaos to the absolute rule of Louis XIV? For centuries, feudalism left nobles ruling their lands like mini-kings. The monarchy struggled to unite these kingdoms. In the 1500s, France erupted into 8 civil wars between Catholics and Protestants. The violence was brutal, from the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre to the assassination of King Henry III. His successor, Henry IV, tried to restore peace with the Edict of Nantes in 1598, granting limited religious tolerance to Protestants. It calmed the wars, but left deep divisions in French society. Decades later, Louis XIV, the Sun King, sought stability through absolutism. He claimed divine right, and in 1685 revoked the Edict of Nantes, forcing religious uniformity as a way to impose order. For France, the road to absolutism ran through centuries of chaos. So what does it mean to be an absolute ruler? France gave us the textbook example. Absolutism is when a king claims total power, no parliament, no shared authority. In the 1600s, after years of civil war and chaos, France turned to strong monarchs to restore order. They ruled by what was called the divine right of kings, the belief that God himself gave them the right to rule. The most famous was King Louis XIV, the Sun King. He built the extravagant Palace of Versailles and forced nobles to live there as courtiers, nobles who spent their time serving, flattering, and competing for the king's favor instead of rebelling. Under absolutism, France became one of Europe's strongest states. But the same system that made Louis powerful also planted the seeds of revolution. Louis XIV, the Sun King, tamed the nobility, but his methods planted the seeds of revolution. At Versailles, nobles became courtiers, competing for the king's favor instead of ruling independently. To keep their loyalty, Louis reinforced their tax privileges, leaving peasants and the middle class to carry the burden. While nobles lived in luxury, the crown spent enormous sums, not only on palaces and parties, but also on wars. Under Louis XIV, France fought costly conflicts, like the War of Spanish Succession, and later monarchs poured money into helping the American Revolution. These expenses drained the treasury. By sparing nobles and overspending on war, the monarchy left France broke and ordinary people resentful, a recipe that exploded in the French Revolution. Before we continue, if you guys can do me a quick favor and like this video, and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel, I would really appreciate it. How did Japan go from centuries of chaos to 250 years of peace? Japan's rugged mountains and scattered islands made it hard for any single leader to control the whole country. During the 1500s, this geography fueled the Sengoku, or the Warring States period, when the rival daimyo, who were powerful feudal lords, fought non-stop for territory. In 1600, Tokugawa Ieyasu defeated his rivals at the Battle of Sekigahara. 3 years later, he was named shogun, the military ruler of Japan. He set up his government in Edo, which is today's Tokyo. The Tokugawa shogunate would rule for more than 250 years. They ended the civil wars and brought lasting peace. But peace came with strict social order and tight control. How do you keep control of an entire country for 250 years? The Tokugawa shoguns locked Japan into a strict social order. At the top was the shogun, followed by the daimyo, who were the powerful feudal lords that ruled their domains across Japan. Below them were the samurai warriors, and then the rest of society, farmers, artisans, and the merchants at the very bottom. To keep the daimyo from rebelling, the Tokugawa enforced the Sankin Kotai, or alternate attendance system. Lords had to spend every other year in Edo, the shogun's capital, while their families stayed there as hostages. This kept the lords loyal and broke their independence. Neo-Confucian values emphasized duty and obedience, reinforcing loyalty to the shogun. These systems created remarkable stability. For over 250 years, Japan had peace, but it came at the cost of strict social control. Why did Japan isolate itself from most of the world for over 200 years? In the 1630s, the Tokugawa shoguns created the Sakoku, or closed country policy. Foreigners were expelled, Christianity was banned, and Japanese people were forbidden to travel abroad. Only a few outsiders were allowed in, mainly the Dutch and Chinese, through the port of Nagasaki. This kept Japan connected just enough to gain knowledge, but under tight control. Isolation brought stability and allowed Japanese culture to flourish. Kabuki theater, haiku poetry, and woodblock prints thrived in this period. But while Japan stood still, the outside world advanced. When American warships forced Japan to open its ports in the 1850s, the Tokugawa shogunate's old system collapsed almost overnight. Why has ruling India as one empire always been so hard? Towering mountains in the north and the rocky Deccan Plateau in the center made it tough to move armies or even ideas across the subcontinent. Geography didn't just divide politics, it encouraged cultural and religious diversity. Even the powerful Gupta Empire couldn't conquer the south. The Deccan protected southern kingdoms, where Hindu traditions thrived separately from the north. When the Guptas collapsed in the 6th century, India did not unite. Instead, dozens of regional kingdoms rose up, some Hindu and later Muslim states too. Geography made India rich in diversity, but made it hard to rule as one empire. Centuries later, the Mughals tried again. But geography never made it easy. The Mughal Empire began with warriors from Central Asia who dreamed of conquering India. Their founder claimed descent from Genghis Khan, who was remembered for building a vast empire across Central Asia. The Mughals brought something new to South Asia: gunpowder weapons. Drawing on Ottoman techniques, they used cannons and muskets at a time when Indian armies relied mostly on cavalry and elephants. In 1526, the Mughal artillery and cavalry crushed the much larger army of the Delhi Sultan. That victory gave the Mughals control of northern India and laid the foundation for a new empire. The Mughals would rule South Asia for 300 years, but conquering was only the beginning. Ruling India was the real test. Once the Mughals established their empire in India, the real challenge was holding it together. Their lands stretched across deserts, jungles, fertile plains, and the rocky Deccan Plateau. These barriers made communication slow and military control difficult. Ruling from Delhi or Agra meant always struggling to keep distant provinces in line. On top of that, India's population was incredibly diverse. Most people were Hindu, while Muslim rulers, scholars, and soldiers made up a powerful minority. Add in Sikhs, Jains, and many local traditions, and the empire was a mosaic of faiths. To survive, the Mughals had to balance geography with diversity. Akbar the Great, for example, won the loyalty of the people by tolerating the Hindus and including them in his court. Without these strategies, the empire would have fractured much sooner. But even with clever policies, geography and diversity never stopped being a challenge. How did one of the world's greatest empires fall apart? By the late 1600s, the Mughal Empire was overstretched. Endless wars in the Deccan drained money and soldiers. The harsh policies of later rulers, including new taxes on Hindus, angered subjects and weakened loyalty. Local powers like the Sikhs grew stronger, and they broke away from Mughal control. Geography made it nearly impossible to pull these regions back together. Meanwhile, European trading companies, especially the British East India Company, saw their chance. As the Mughals fractured, the British expanded, taking territory piece by piece until India became their colony. How do you hold together an empire of Turks, Arabs, Greeks, Jews, and more? The Ottoman Empire had a strategy: tolerance. They ruled with Islamic law from the Quran, yet instead of forcing everyone to convert, they created a system that tolerated religious diversity. Christians and Jews were organized into self-governing communities called Millets. They collected their own taxes, ran schools, and followed their own laws, as long as they stayed loyal to the Sultan, of course. When Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492, Sultan Bayezid II welcomed them. They brought skills in trade, medicine, and crafts, and this made the Ottoman Empire stronger, while Spain started to grow weaker. The tolerance was not equality. Non-Muslims paid special taxes, they couldn't hold top government or military positions, and sometimes they had to wear distinctive clothing that set them apart from the masses. Still, this balance of tolerance and control helped the Ottomans hold together one of history's most diverse empires for centuries. So how did a small state in Turkey grow into an empire across 3 continents? The Ottomans had the firepower and the strategy. In 1453, their cannons smashed through the 1,000-year-old walls of Constantinople, and this gave the Ottomans control of the crossroads between Europe and Asia, and made the city, renamed Istanbul, the new heart of their empire. From there, the Ottomans expanded fast into the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa, taking over trade routes and dominating the Mediterranean Sea. A key to their power was the devshirme system. This was when Christian boys were taken from conquered lands, converted to Islam, and made to work in the Sultan's government. Some became janissaries, which was the elite infantry of the empire, and among the first in the world to use muskets and cannons. At its height under Suleiman the Magnificent, who ruled from 1520 to 1566, the empire spanned Asia, Africa, and Europe. Conquering is one thing, but how do you run an empire across 3 continents? The Ottomans had the answer: a centralized bureaucracy. At the top was the Sultan, who held absolute power, like a president, a general, and a Supreme Court judge, all rolled into one. A bureaucracy is a system where officials, not just the ruler, handle day-to-day governing. The Ottoman system was centralized. Instead of letting local nobles run things, the Sultan appointed his own officials to govern provinces, kind of like states in the US under the rule of governors, except they all answered directly to him in Istanbul. Suleiman the Magnificent, who ruled from 1520 to 1566, was called the lawgiver for organizing this system. Think of it this way. The US splits power between the president, Congress, and courts. The Ottomans combined all 3, centered on one man, the Sultan, backed by his centralized bureaucracy. That mix of absolute power and a centralized bureaucracy is what kept the Ottoman Empire running for over 600 years. How did West Africa become one of the wealthiest regions of the medieval world? The key was the gold and salt trade. West Africa was rich in gold, especially in the lands of Mali, but gold alone was not enough. People also needed salt to preserve food and to stay healthy in the hot climate. Caravans crossed the Sahara Desert, carrying salt from North Africa and returning with West African gold. These trade routes linked Mali to the wider Islamic world. The rulers of Mali, like Mansa Musa, taxed this trade and grew incredibly wealthy. Musa's famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 displayed Mali's riches to the world. Gold and salt did not just enrich Mali, they made West Africa a vital hub in global trade during the Middle Ages. When Europeans looked at West Africa in the Middle Ages, they saw a land of legendary wealth. The Catalan Atlas, a 1375 world map, even shows Mansa Musa of Mali holding a giant gold nugget, a symbol of Africa's riches that fascinated Europeans. By the 1400s, Portuguese explorers reached the West African coast. At first, they came for gold and traded with local kingdoms. But soon, trade changed. Europeans built forts along the coast and began taking part in the transatlantic slave trade. The arrival of Europeans shifted West Africa's role in global trade. Gold was still important, but human beings became a tragic new commodity, reshaping the region's history for centuries to come. When Europeans reached West Africa, they didn't just bring ships and trade goods, they brought guns. For centuries, African kingdoms like Mali and Songhai had relied on traditional armies of cavalry and spearmen to control trade routes and territory. But starting in the 1400s, Portuguese and other Europeans began trading firearms along the coast. Some African rulers gained access to muskets and cannons, while others did not. This created a new imbalance. Kingdoms with European weapons could overpower rivals, expand their influence, and control trade. But it also fueled conflict, as leaders used guns to capture people for the new transatlantic slave trade. European weapons didn't just change warfare in Africa, they reshaped the entire balance of power across the region. The Asante Kingdom of West Africa shows how powerful African states could be, and even why they eventually fell. Founded in the 1600s, the Asante created a centralized state. At the top was the Asante Hene, the king who ruled from the capital at Kumasi. A council of chiefs helped govern, and local leaders owed loyalty to the throne. This system allowed the Asante to unite many peoples under one kingdom. The Asante grew rich from gold and the Atlantic slave trade, and their strong government kept the kingdom stable for centuries. But over time, internal divisions and constant wars drained the state. In the 1800s, clashes with the expanding British Empire weakened the Asante further, leading to their eventual defeat. Even the Asante, with a strong government and great wealth, could not escape decline under the pressures of global change and European colonization. Most of what I do on YouTube is a review of world history content, mainly geared towards students who are taking AP World History exams or the New York State Global History and Geography Regents. So check out all my playlists about multiple choice questions, short answer questions, and even essay writing.